Hello. There are a whole lot of things going on in Riyadh and who knows Kiev and Washington D.C. And I think Ray McGovern and I need to have a little discussion. Let's talk. Well, if I wanted to try to figure out what was happening, I'd try to find someone who was fluent in Russian and German, someone who had worked for the CIA, someone who had actually delivered the daily information to the President of the United States at one point in his life, and that would be Ray McGovern. Ray, I'm just gonna. What do you want to start off by watching a little video? I got an interesting video. You want to start off by taking a look at this. This is maybe you could tell people who we're looking at before we get it started.
Yeah, this is a German diplomat who was shepherding the Munich Security Council. That's the MSC there, and he was the one that so joyfully greeted and introduced Vice President J.D. Vance just a couple of days ago. And he and others were the ones that were shocked at what J.D. Vance said. Now, it all started very pleasantly when J.D. Vance expressed sympathy for a terrorist attack that had happened in Munich the previous day. And J.D. Vance had the presence of mind to say, now, I hope this isn't the last time I get some applause here. Uh-oh, I said to myself, what's coming?
Well, let's hear what he has to say. Uh-oh.
This is at the end.
Of Vice President Vance on Friday, we have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful to all those European politicians that spoke out and reaffirmed the values and principles that they are defending. No one did this better than President Zelensky. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
Yay! The end. Well, Ray, based on some things that went down in Saudi Arabia today, I think he's going to have more to cry. I think he's going to be crying crocodile tears for quite a while. Ray, what are your thoughts on where we are in the potentially the end game of this proxy war?
You know, it's hard to avoid Schadenfreude when thinking about these European clucks that have been destroying Europe and ruining NATO. But, you know, when this fellow who was responsible for orchestrating the Munich Security Council conference and actually excluded some of the German parties that are not establishment parties and was criticized directly for that by Vice President Vance, it's hard to feel sorry for him, even though he's reduced to tears by saying, now let me conclude. And this is very difficult for me. And he bursts out in tears and he can't conclude. And luckily, some comely blonde-haired woman comes up and wipes his tears off and tries to embraces him twice, you know. Well, Carla, I'm glad you picked that thing out because it's emblematic. It's sort of a metaphor of what has happened to Europe since they decided to heed willy-nilly the diktat of the United States, to include sitting by and blessing the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, which gave them an industrial capability that they have lost, right? So this was the capstone of the end of the Munich Security Conference. And when you think of just the last 6 days, Gordon, on the 12th, Putin, Trump talking, 90 minutes, okay? Okay? The outcome was clearly, let's get down to business. Next thing you know, the defense secretary, Hexteth, he's in Brussels talking to NATO. And he says, remember you're talking about the getting Ukraine into NATO? Forget about it. Remember you're talking about all these other things about NATO's going to do? Forget about it. And Ukraine, if you think that they can reclaim these lands that have been captured by Russia, well, forget about that too, Whoa, he's telling NATO that. And if that weren't bad enough, the next day, we're talking the 14th now, we have J.D. Vance getting up there and reading them a riot act about values, saying that, violating the equivalent of our First Amendment, prohibiting freedom of speech or the press, that's for the birds. We ought to not be so afraid of Russia or China. We should fear the enemy within. My God, oh my God, so that's J.D. Vance. Now, most people know that sequence of events, but the very next day, Rubio, our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Sergei Lavrov, the Foreign Minister of Russia, had an extensive conversation. And what they said was really quite dramatic. They said, look, we want to repair the damage that was done by Obama and by Biden. Obama, as you know, threw out Russian diplomats, confiscated Russian property in the United States, all on a ruse, all on a hoax, all on the Russiagate story, which he knew was false, which he was a full participant in with Hillary Clinton and all those FBI and CIA and Department of Justice leaders who also knew that the Russiagate and the hacking of the DNC emails were all invented by, Hillary Clinton's best person, which in my view must have been Jake Sullivan. Okay, so getting back here, what Trump is remembering is that all this went down and prevented him from having, well, let's face it, it kind of emasculated him during his first term. He was not able to do any of the things he wanted to do, and particularly not because everyone, especially the mainstream media, said that he could not have possibly won if he hadn't had the help of the Russians who hacked into the DNC, gave those emails to WikiLeaks, and prevented Hillary Clinton from winning the presidency as she rightly deserved to win. Well, it was all BS. We know that now. Trump didn't seem to know that very well during those first 4 years, but it's all out there now. There's testimony under oath saying, look, there's no technical evidence at all that the Russians or anyone else hacked into those emails in the DNC. And this testimony comes from the head of the CrowdStrike cyber firm, who the FBI hired to do the forensics on those emails. Okay, now who is this? Oh, it's founded and run by a fellow named Sean Henry. Who is he? Oh, he worked for the CIA director for 20 years. See a little incest here. So they thought they would give him the job. And he lied, of course, and said, sure, yeah, the Russians attacked, until he was put under oath on the 5th of December, 2017. And when they asked him, it was Adam Schiff that asked him, now tell us, Mr. Henry, how it was that the Russians hacked into the DNC emails. He started to go, well, it was that, and his lawyer Pulled him aside. You're under oath. You're under oath. He said, well, actually, Congressman, there's no technical evidence. We looked all through it. No technical evidence that the Russians or anybody else hacked into those DNC emails. Okay, so Trump knows all that now. He's got this bevy of influence of evidence that persuades him that, look, he's going to make a frontal assault on all these guys, not only internally, especially when he gets Kash Patel, who knows where the bodies are buried, literally, into office as FBI director, but also in this foreign area. He's going to proceed, okay? So on the 12th, he talks to Putin. On the 13th, our defense minister says, Ukraine is finished. It's not going to go into NATO. Forget about it, okay? On the 14th, the vice president says, look, we don't really think you share our values because you're hindering free speech. And look to the enemy within, says J.D. Vance. And then Rubio and Lavrov have this conversation the next day, namely the 15th. We're talking 4 days in a row. And they say, look, we need to make sure that we repair our diplomatic relations, that we end the confiscation of properties, that we rebuild our enemies, that we start talking, that we review broader issues, not just Ukraine, but Palestine, broader Middle Eastern issues, read Iran. And we have to just make sure that we maintain this dialogue, which has been stifled for the last 3 years, and then prepare for a Russian-American summit meeting. So that's Rubio and Lavrov on the 15th. Now, the 16th was a day of rest. On the 17th, yesterday, seven European leaders went to Paris. Now, as you could see, maybe some of them, maybe not all of them were crying, but they were gobsmacked by what J.D. Vance said and what Hegseth had said the day before also. So what do you do when you're gobsmacked? Well, you have a meeting. You have a meeting. And of course, the head of France said, oh, come here to Paris. We'll discuss all this. Well, it was a comedy of errors. How are you going to discuss something that you don't know how to handle? And we're going to have to redraw our thinking and all that kind of stuff. So meanwhile, of course, the British say, oh, we're not going to, we have a 100-year agreement with Ukraine, and we're not going to leave them. We're ready to send British forces in there as peacekeepers. What British forces? It's become the theater of the absurd. So nothing happened in Paris yesterday. They have to lick their wounds. And just to finish the story, what happened after yesterday, namely today? Oh my God. This is sort of the denouement. As most people know, two delegations, very high delegations, headed by the Foreign Secretary of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, and Marco Rubio, who's our Secretary of State. Rubio was accompanied by the President's Assistant for National Security Affairs, Mike Waltz, and also, what's his name, Witkoff, the special negotiator, okay? And the three of them are sitting there for an AP interview, and it's very, very clear that they got along really well with the Russian interlocutors, who included not only Lavrov, but Ushakov, who is Putin's main man for all these issues. And indeed, he and Lavrov talked separately with the Crown Prince before any of this started, okay? So what was the result of this one? Sorry to carry on so long, but this is really, really relevant and really important. Okay. Says Rubio, we agreed on 4 things. First of all, we're going to enhance our diplomatic relations. We're going to have ambassadors. We're going to undo the damage that was done both by Obama, who I would just say again, parenthetically, knew damn well that Russiagate was a invented animal by Hillary's people. Okay, he knew, and he went along with it. Matter of fact, he was the chief instigator of getting a memo out by the Department of Homeland Security and the Director of National Intelligence on October 1. Okay, I remind you that October 1 is about a month before the election, right? They didn't hear from the forensic investigation yet. And so Obama said, look, it's getting late and we can't wait. We want you to put out a memo saying the Russians hacked, the Russians hacked, the Russians hacked, and tried to do in Hillary at least a month before the election. And so they did. How do I know that? Jay Johnson, the former head of Homeland Security, confessed to that. He says the pressure was great. We didn't have the evidence, but Obama said, go ahead anyway. Now, Trump knows all this, and he's talked for 90 minutes to Putin. Putin, if he didn't already know all this, knows this too. So redoing or repairing the relationship that was shattered in very, very unsubtle ways by Obama first, and then, of course, by Biden.
Let me ask you a question, Ray.
Sure.
From those of us, you know the importance of the embassies and all that. So I'm reading one of the first steps agreed upon during the meeting is solve the issue of diplomatic missions, given that both countries, okay. And it goes, Washington committed to appoint ambassadors to each other's countries as soon as possible, remove the artificial barriers. So they had seized properties of the Russians and all. Let me ask you this. How important is that? I mean, okay, you don't have ambassadors, whatever. How important is it? Why is that a big deal to have the ambassadors, to give them their property back, and to get the embassy staffed properly and all of why is that so important?
Well, if you've worked in diplomatic circles as I have, you know that you need to have lots of specialists with direct entree to specialists on the other side to discuss the nitty-gritty of all this. Now, Trump can go so far with his forceful imagination and his chaos that he creates and gobsacking or whatever it's called, other people. But then these things have to be worked out, not only to the satisfaction of the Russians and the Ukrainians and eventually NATO, but also, he's got a major military industrial complex in this country. There are going to be all kinds of people who will try to undermine this, as they did before. He knows where the bodies are buried now. He has two people in place. He will have Kash Patel this week. He's got Tulsi Gabbard. He's got other strong people who are going to come in and say, look, we know what you did last time. You're not going to put the kibosh on a good relationship, a decent relationship with Russia. Russia poses no threat to us. Neither does China. That's why Trump can say, let's cut our defense expenditures in half. Let's talk to Russia and China, get them to agree. We really ought to do that and not build any more nuclear weapons. Whoa! When's the last time that happened? Well, maybe in June 1963, when President John F. Kennedy reached out to the Russians as though they were human beings too. So what I'm saying here, this is a lot of stuff that needs to be worked out. And it's not going to happen automatically. So you need people on the ground. You need an ambassador who knows something about Russia. That would be nice. You need an ambassador who's not a Russophobe, but that would be nice too. And by the same token, you need somebody of the caliber of Antonov, the previous ambassador, who left because nobody would talk to him in Washington several months ago. So that's why that is important.
Okay.
It really does matter. The second point here was we're going to work on Ukraine. Now, that was the second point. Okay. Are they working on Ukraine? You bet your patootie they are. But it's the second point, and it's part of this whole rapprochement, okay, or détente, you pick your word, that I've seen happen before. I mean, one one benefit of being as old as I am, Darwin, is if you've seen things like this before, and I can tell you this is a benchmark. Is it just the first step? No, it's not just the first step. This is a sea change. This is a benchmark, and it's of a character that I've seen before. We can talk about that a little bit later. Ukraine. Okay, the third one is to examine geopolitical issues like economic relations, why they are so hindered by it. Why can't we work out economic problems together? Read End of Sanctions, folks. End of sanctions. Oh, but the Europeans still have sanctions. Sorry, Europeans, you've been left high and dry. Look at the good side of this. You Italians and you Hungarians can sell your apples if there's still a market for apples in Russia. Okay, so these things come around, and after a while, the Europeans will realize, well, yeah, we were sold a bill of goods about sanctions. We followed, we followed instinctively what the U.S. lead was, like we always do. No longer do we need to do that. Maybe we look at the good side of things. Okay, that was number 3. The fourth was we're going to move in the direction in a productive way. We're going to move succinctly and regularly. When we keep up these contacts, we're going to make this very different from what happened during the Biden administration. Now, that's what Rubio and Waltz, and it was really interesting. Rubio was always saying, now, President Donald Trump said this, and Donald, it was sort of like, I remember when the Mao Zedong was in charge of China, according to Chairman Mao, according to Chairman Mao, said that Chairman it was slavish, okay? But, Rubio, for whatever hardliner he is, he's going to do what I'm not Mao, but what President Trump says, okay? Now, I immediately turned to the Russian readout, and I don't have anything in English yet, but I've translated what Lavrov said in just a little bit over 3 minutes. He made a point initially of saying, look, we came with our big hitters. Ushakov. Now, Ushakov is a very big hitter, second only to Lavrov himself in this pecking order of working out these problems, okay? He's been in on the Ukraine thing forever, okay? Now, Ushakov and I met with the Crown Prince, and we thank him for his good offices, and we discussed bilateral relations and how we... Mike Waltz, during the other interview, forgot to thank the Crown Prince until halfway. He goes, let me interrupt there. We got to thank the... So Lavrov and Ushakov, of course, no diplomatic etiquette, they started out by thanking the Saudi king. And then what the Lavrov says is, Secretary Rubio started out and he said, we have national interests and you have national interests. And sometimes they can coincide. Sometimes we can live together, but sometimes they clash, okay? And so our job here is to see how we can avoid really bad things happening when these national interests don't coincide. Whoa. Wow, how about that? That sounds like a pretty sensible idea, doesn't it? Okay, so that's the way he starts out. And then he says, now, we had extensive discussions, and they were очень полезно. Now, очень is very, полезно is very useful. Now, in diplomatic speak or etiquette, очень полезно is about as good as you can get, okay? They were very useful. Wow. That's something that has not been used in Soviet or Russian-American relations in a long time. Okay, so we fully explored the geopolitical possibilities, and there are many economic. Did I say economic? Yeah, economic possibilities. Did I say read sanctions? So that's what he's saying here. And he ends up by saying the big thing is we're in contact after 3 years. He doesn't say this, but the implication is despite all the stuff we've experienced on the American side, this is a first step. There's a degree of trust. Again, he doesn't say trust, but there is a possibility that enough trust, a modicum of trust can be rebuilt so that they can deal with this Ukrainian problem in a larger setting. And China, well, I mentioned before that Trump has invited China and Russia to participate in halving defense expenditures. My God, the Chinese, I think, and the Russians, the Chinese being in on these strategic arms limitation talks for the first time, if they happen, they'd be delighted with that too, because they don't want to spend themselves into oblivion to match everything that the Russians or the U.S. does. So just to finish up, Garland, and thanks for letting me go on here. I've been around for a while, and the first analogy that I would cite would be Nixon's visit to China in January of 1972, and the way that persuaded the Russians that we were more clever than previous administrations, that is Nixon and Kissinger were, and then they're going to play us off against the Russians, and they would steal a march with us if the Russians didn't act more sensibly. Now, I was chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch at that point. We thought that the Russians were interested in arms controls by themselves. In other words, they don't want to get outspent by the U.S. But we also thought that this opening to China would create a lot of leverage on the Russians so that they would be more flexible in hard negotiations. We watched that happen on Berlin. The quadripartite agreement on Berlin happened right after the visit to China. And we told Kissinger and Nixon, look, looks like your little clever diplomacy is working. The Russians are not going to be beat out by the Chinese in developing relations with you. They're serious about arms control. You can conclude the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which was concluded in May of 1972. I was there in Moscow because we had worked very hard on it, not only in saying these kinds of things to Kissinger and Nixon, but also in being able to verify them. Okay, proveraj no doveraj no proveraj. What is it? Trust but verify. Okay, was when that started. Not later under Reagan, although it obtained then too. So it was verifiable. We could assure Nixon, because of the technical means that we had, that we would detect Soviet violations. Did they violate it? Yeah. Did we call them on it? Yeah. Within a week, we did. Did the Russians tear down this unauthorized, illegal monster radar in Krasnoyarsk in the middle of Siberia? Yes, they did. Only after Gorbachev came in. Before that, they said, no, that's not. So anyhow, you can work these things out if you have verification means. Now, what did I mean by that? That started real détente, approaching rapprochement, okay? 1972. What happens next? Well, I was still on active duty with the CIA. I was actually briefing the president's senior advisors one-on-one during the Reagan administration, when all of a sudden the real troglodytes, the real Russophobes, persuaded him to call Russia the evil empire, early 1983, okay? And then he got up and he said, okay, I declare that we're going to attack Russia within 30 minutes. Oh, it was a big joke. It was a big joke. But not so funny was a big exercise that the Pentagon orchestrated without telling the CIA or anybody else, a main nuclear exercise where our allies and their leaders and our vice president would be taking part in November of 1983, right after the shoot down of the KAL 007 civilian aircraft over Siberia in early September around Labor Day, again, 1983. The atmosphere was poisonous, and it was so poisonous because we lied, okay? We had intercepted communications about that whole event, okay? It was a civilian aircraft, okay? It flew hundreds of miles into Siberia off course, okay? It was the middle of the night. Do we have intercepted communications, control tower, pilot, that they shot it down deliberately? Yes, we do. Do we have any indication as to whether they knew that it was a civilian aircraft? Yes, we do. They didn't know it was a civilian aircraft, okay? And that's proven by these intercepts as well. Unfortunately, for the Russians, we only showed some minutes, 8 minutes of those intercepts, and accused the Russians before the UN of deliberately shooting down a civilian aircraft, knowing it was a civilian aircraft, okay, with almost 300 people abroad, okay? So you're Andropov, or whoever was in charge then, okay? You look at, it was Andropov. You look at it all as, my God, and then your spies are saying, look, they're going to have this big exercise. We think it's the real thing. What happened? Abel Archer launched in November 1983 again. All the KGB stations around the world were alerted to look for, make sure, was this real thing and all. And then we had one, the British had this spy, but we had to take from him. And he said, look, the KGB has decided this is the real thing. The fighter bombers loaded with nuclear weapons are revving up on the airfields in East Germany. You better realize that this is coming, okay? Now, then finally, our analysts in CIA figured out what was going on. And a good friend of mine, you probably know him, Mel Goodman, had the guts. He was a division chief in the Soviet area. He had the guts to go to Bobby Gates, who was he was head of intelligence, okay? And they said, look, Bobby, you got to tell them to stop this off. And Gates said, they're just bluffing. Later in his book, he says, making the Russians or the Soviets comfortable was not at the top of my job jar. So, what did Goodman do? To his great credit, he and two others went around Gates, went directed to the director's office, knocked on the door. Mr. Casey, we need to talk to you. He let him in. They told him what the situation was. He listened carefully. He said, okay, you may leave now. They opened the door, closed it behind him. Next thing you know, Abel Archer was toned down, no more high-level participation, and the lines were open to the Russians. Look, this was just an exercise. Please, cross our hearts, hope to die, just an exercise. Now, wow, that undid a lot of the stuff that came out of the initial strategic arms limitation. But what happened then? Finally, we were able to persuade Ronald Reagan. When I say we, I mean Secretary Shultz. I mean Vice President Bush. I mean the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, okay? People that we talk to every morning. We were able to give them what real analysts, people who knew Russia, thought about all this. And before you knew it, Gorbachev was in power. And Reagan would say, was this a guy we can deal with? Is he the real deal? And we told him, yeah, try it, okay? So what happens? Gorbachev says, I'm glad we avoided war in 83, but my God, you got those Pershing II missiles in Western Europe, and we have these SS-20s, and all that means is now with a 10-minute warning, we have these ICBMs. Why don't we destroy all the ones that have 10-minute warning, all the intermediate range ballistic missiles? And Reagan comes to us. He says, "Can he be serious?" And we said, "Well, the deterrent is a deterrent. I mean, we have these. It takes 30 minutes for these ICBMs, but it's a deterrent. It's worked for 30 years. So why don't you ask them?" Well, they worked it out. They worked it out. And in 1987, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement provided that these two classes of missiles, intermediate range and medium range, were destroyed, were cut in half, Scott Ritter, my good friend, was the first one on the ground as an inspector in a god-awful place called Votkinsk in Siberia, 2 years, making sure that the letter of that agreement was observed, because there are lots of people on both sides here who want to scuttle that agreement. It was done, okay? Now, that was good news. I was surprised that could be done, but we had a new era of being able to get along with the Russians for a while, okay? Now, the next thing, of course, is Trump coming in, and just before he leaves, in 2019, okay, he gets out of the INF treaty because the Air Force or the Army or somebody, the military-industrial complex, this would be a good thing to do. And stupidly, he cancels the agreement. Now, that agreement was in force for 32 years. The SALT, ABM treaty, 30 years. So all of a sudden, you have no basis for strategic balance, okay? A willingness to make sure that neither side decides they can launch some missiles without being destroyed in response. So now I think Trump probably regrets what he did on that. He knows that Biden has extracted a promise from Scholz in Berlin, who's not going to be around more than one more week, that the U.S. will put the same kind of Pershing missiles in Germany by joint agreement. When Scholz was asked about this, he said, "Well, the Americans say they want to do this, and so we agreed." Well, that kind of relationship is not long-lived, in my view. That's supposed to happen next year, 2026. There's all kinds of latitude here where Trump and Putin could talk about these things and say, "Look, we can work these things out." So what's my bottom line here? I'm one who hid under his desk in grade school because the Russians want to shoot atom bombs at me, okay? I was so enthusiastic. I was walking on air when the ABM treaty was concluded. I could see it was a bedrock for stability. It was for 30 years. And my God, I had a personal little bit of a role in that, making sure that we had good advice for these guys and also that we could verify. So I was so enthusiastic, and then all of a sudden what happens? Well, the Soviet Union falls apart. We take advantage of that. And so this time I see a benchmark happening today in Saudi Arabia, of all places, okay? It's a Monday, it's a 12, 13, 14, 15, day of rest for the 16th. 17, the Paris, but these people don't know what to do. 8, is today the 18th? Okay, whatever it is, we're
18th it is.
Yeah, so within not even a week, okay, let's say 6 days, Trump has upset the apple cart. He's created chaos in the alliance, okay? Now, can he bring order out of chaos? Well, I don't think it's simply up to him. These European leaders are going to have to face up to the fact that they're not going to be able to heighten their spending up to 2%, much less 5%. They're going to have to say why. And they're going to have to restrain their own military industrial complex and say, look, we can't do this anymore. And besides, I don't know if Russia is a threat anymore. They say they're not a threat. Even the Americans say they're not a threat. So how can you justify all these expenditures? Let's see if we can deal with the Russians. Let's open those Siemens and other factories in Russia. Let's even think of the end of sanctions so we can get back on our better foot. The Russians have 4% GNP growth this year. We Germans have 0 or less than 0. So there are all kinds of possibilities here. If I seem enthusiastic, well, that's because I am. And yeah, okay, there's many a slip between cup and lip. And taking on the military-industrial complex and the media, which is part of it, of course, and the deep state, is a formidable task. Trump couldn't do it the first time around. Whether he could do it this time or not is still only a 50-50 chance, in my view.
Let me ask you this, Ray. Let's talk a little bit about Europe. So initially we have, the immediate reaction. There's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I mean that both literally and figuratively, right? They're literally crying in their soup. Oh my God, Trump's here. They're going to make friends with the Russians. That's unthinkable with this particular political class we have now. Okay. But we know there's no honor amongst thieves, and we know that when a bunch of bank robbers rob a bank, once they get back to the hideout, they all want the biggest chunk of money, right? So, okay, as it starts to hit on these people, they stand for, here's my belief, they don't really stand for anything. Right now, okay, they're in shock. But once as they say in D.C., and everybody wants to get on the train once it's left the station. So now, I hate to use too many hackneyed cliches, but I think you know what I mean. Okay. Oh, we're going to send troops. We're going to send troops. And then they have this meeting, and that didn't go so well, apparently. Now Macron has said, well, yeah, I don't think we're going to send troops. Of course, he wasn't. I think there's and Europe better. I think there's a part 2 to this. Part 1 is we cry, we scream, we beat on the wall, we yell, this is terrible, this is unfair. Part 2 is these thieves looking at each other and saying, WIIFM, right? What's in it for me? Next thing you know, they're going to go from, once they realize Trump's going to do this, and they're talking to the Russians, and the Russians are going to do this, and we got to get back and get some of that market. There's fossil fuels to be extracted. There's uranium to go in our nuclear power. They're going to go from, how these people are. We're fighting it to, this train has left the station, and I got to be first in line to get my slice of the pie, right? Macron's already started. Now, I would argue the problem the Brits have is when the British Empire crashed, they thought, okay, we'll hold on to the U.S. and we'll still be part. And they now are going to have to come to the reality that the British Empire is no more. But my thought is there's going to be people starting in Britain, and I mean in the Europe, that are going to start easing away from the crowd. Starmer's going to say, we got a problem, Macron, and Macron's going to say, what do you mean we? I got to call Putin, and I've got to talk over we got some wood. You could sell Peugeots in we could sell Peugeot back in Russia. Did you know that? We got all kinds of things we could sell them. So what do you think about my belief that part 2 comes? And these people who don't really stand for anything, when they realize what's going to happen, you're going to see a whole bunch of people try to jump back on now that this train's left the station, they're going to get off the Keir Starmer train, etc., and they're going to climb on the new train and try to get on that one. Do you think I'm wrong, or will they hold out for some rules-based order values that is already toast? What do you think, Ray?
Well, Carlin, just thinking of this off the top of my head, I think that one danger is a false flag attack. Now, the British are in like this with Zelensky and his crowd. There are all kinds of leaders in the Ukrainian leadership who would just be delighted to get the go-ahead to do something really, really dramatic, to put the kibosh on all this. All I'm saying here is we have to be alert for that because that's not to be ruled out at this point. Okay. Now, with respect to the political leaders, they have been shown to be such gullible hacks, such Arschlöcher is what the Germans would say, that they're going to be removed from office. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens on the 23rd. What's that, 5 days away or so in Germany? My God, you know? Uh, what effect is it going to have in making the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, more respectable? That J.D. Vance complained about them being kept out of the Munich Security Conference and then visiting one of their leaders in ostentatious kind of way. What's it going to mean? Well, I have lots of German friends. Okay, I've talked to them. None of them can hazard a guess as to how that will affect the prospects for the AfD. So we'll just have to wait. I think that's sensible. Who knows? But there are going to be repercussions as soon as the European people know what's happened. There is the fly in the ointment. Would you believe, Garland, that the media in England, the media in Germany, and almost including France, is worse than the media here? I mean, that boggles the mind, doesn't it? But the German people, to the degree that they see alternative media, even then they're afraid to whisper what they learn. For God's sake, that could get them in trouble with the authorities. I mean, it's almost as bad as it was in 1933, for God's sake, all right? And the British, you can be put in jail for being a broadcaster, like some of my friends are liable for getting into jail. So the problem is it's going to have to be pretty gradual, and new leadership will have to come in, and new media. You know, these people have to get more used to plugging into Garland Nixon and other people who have alternative views for the Alternative für Deutschland, right? So I think it's going to happen, but it's going to happen slowly. And that's why Trump is doing all this stuff within 6 days, for God's sake. Maybe now he'll rest on the seventh day. But yeah, it's a formidable task. But let's face it, the U.S. holds the cards. Russia has won the war in Ukraine. Putin is aware that Trump is well educated now, as he was not before the first time around.
Tulsi Gabbard's giving him advice. That's a big, I think that's a, if I may add that, one of the things that shows that, demonstrates that, if you read what Lavrov said, and it says the U.S. has started to listen to Russia. The Russian and American delegations not only listened, but also heard each other during the talks, Lavrov said. The U.S. has begun to better understand Russia's position, which Moscow repeatedly outlined over the years. The minister admitted it does not mean the national interest of the two countries would no longer be in conflict. So here's what I read this. We had a talk. And in the talk, they knew what happened. They knew when it happened. They knew who did what. When we said this happened, and they said, yeah, we know that happened, and this happened, and this happened. And I think of Tulsi Gabbard sitting there providing, I'm the DNI. I have to brief these guys on intelligence before they meet. Okay, here's what happened. Here's when it happened. Boom, boom, boom. Here's the data. Here's the dates. Here's the hour. Instead of just a bunch of crap. Well, Putin is evil. I give what was said. I give quotes, dates, times, etc. They then study them when they sit down with the Russians. And the Russians say, what do you think? Well, okay, I know that on such and such a day, this said that. I know that you filed a complaint on this and such a date. I know that you, on December 17th or 19th, 2021, you sent us this list of your demands. And here's the list of the demands. We've studied the blah. And the Russians sit there and go, my God, after talking to Tony Blinken, who just said you're evil and I'm not talking to you anymore, you guys have a folder with times and dates and years and hours. That's what I hear from the Russians. They know the truth now, and we're dealing with reality instead of a narrative. I think that's critical, Russia. I mean, Ray.
I think you're right, and it's even worse than that because it wasn't that Tony Blinken called Lavrov evil. I would point out incidentally that Tony Blinken never learned how to pronounce Lavrov. This is a small thing, but if your opposite number, the Russian foreign minister, has a name that's pronounced a certain way, it's so hard to realize they have to say off like Lavrov. Well, he never learned that. Anyhow, it was worse than that because they didn't talk at all. As a matter of fact, take the anti-ballistic missile treaty, 2022, okay? 30 years later, George W. Bush gets out of the treaty without explanation. The Russians come and say, why'd you do that? None of your damn business. Ooh. Trump, 2019, we're getting out of the INF treaty. Russians come and say, why? None of your damn business. Okay. We're gonna get Ukraine and NATO. We're going to arm them and make sure that they're a formidable adversary on your border. And the Russians say, why are you doing that? And we say, none of your damn business. So all I'm saying here is that the willingness to exchange views, to listen to each other, I mean, that's not an idle concept here. What Lavrov is saying is finally, these people are acting like diplomats, like people we can deal with. And that's really, really big. Now, one other thing I'd say about Russiagate and its effect on all this. Russiagate was manufactured, I think, by Jake Sullivan working for Hillary Clinton, but Obama promoted it real strong, knowing that it was deceitful, okay? But it was there and it was implemented. And Trump didn't really catch on till too late, but he knows who did this, okay? The consequential effect, number one, is that it made 80%, I would guess, of the American people think that Putin is the devil incarnate, that the Russians are ambitious and that they want to take over the rest of Europe just like they used to before the Soviet Union fell apart, okay? Consequential. That's important. And that worried me to death 4 months ago when it looked like it might come to a nuclear exchange. And most of the American people would support that because they don't know better from what the propaganda from the Rachel Maddows are talking about. Okay, now, what's the other consequential effect? Trump has been through it. Trump knows chapter and verse of what was done to him. Trump, 90 minutes with Putin. Yeah, Trump knows chapter and verse not only what was done to Putin way back there under Obama and then under Biden. He also knows lots of other things about, for example, here's something that very few people know. Getting back to before the war, 2 months before the war in Ukraine, President Putin got up before all his top-ranking military people, equivalent of 4 stars, defense minister and everything else, 21 December, okay? And he says, look, it's really very dangerous what the Americans are doing. They have bases in Romania and Poland from which they can fire these missiles. And if they get hypersonic missiles, I have 4 to 5 minutes to decide whether I blow up the rest of the world. whether I ask you guys to launch. Okay. Now they looked at him. You could see what they were thinking. And so what Putin says is, so we have to have ironclad agreements, like on paper, and make sure. And I could see these generals and admirals on paper, huh? Well, like the ABM treaty, Mr. Putin, huh? Or maybe the INF, or Open Skies. Okay. Mr. Putin, you've got to do better than get something on paper, right? So what happens? 9 days later, the 30th of December, 2021 now, White House gets a call. Mr. Putin would like to talk to Mr. Biden right away, please, today. What's going on here? Our negotiators are meeting in Geneva in just 2 weeks. They talked just 2 weeks ago. And please, Mr. Putin needs to talk to Mr. Biden like today. Well, hold on. Okay. Where's Biden? He's in Delaware. Why is that important? He doesn't have his advisors with him. He takes the call, to his credit. Okay. Out of that call comes a readout. The readout is Mr. Biden said the U.S. had no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Okay. They're bad enough in Poland. They're bad enough in Romania. But in Ukraine, he has no intention to put offensive strike missiles, that's what they call these things, in Ukraine. Whoa! Ushakov, were mentioned before. They're delirious with delight. It goes before the press. And New Year's Eve has never been so celebratory, okay? And then they get to Geneva. And what was her name? The woman who was heading our she was Deputy Secretary of State. I'll think of it in a second.
Newland?
No, Deputy Secretary of State, much more of a, well, anyhow. She gets there with Ryabkov, 12th of January now. And she says, oh, man, he says, Ryabkov, okay, let's get down to tax now. Your president has said you have no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, or if they're hypersonic, it's 4, maybe less minutes. So let's figure out the modalities of this. And she says, I didn't hear anything about that. I have no instructions on that. That's the 12th of January, 2022 now. Okay. So on the 21st of January, 2022, Lavrov beats Blinken in Geneva. And he says, Tony, let's start talking about this undertaking that President Biden made on the 30th of December, not to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. And Tony says, forget about it. It's none of your damn business. We have a right to put offensive strike missiles anywhere, including Ukraine, and we'll do it if they ask us to do it. Now, we might be able to talk about how many we put in there, but forget about it. He was all alone there in Delaware. You know that. You took advantage. We weren't, so forget about it. Now, that's the 21st of January. That's that 1 month before the invasion of the special military operation into Ukraine. So, Lavrov tells Putin, look, they've done it again. It's not only Minsk, it's not only Istanbul, now they've tricked us again. Looks like we have to draw the appropriate conclusions. Next thing you know, where is Putin? Beijing. Now, this had been pre-arranged, of course, because Putin was a special guest to open up the Winter Olympics there, okay? But by then he had decided, look, no dealing with these guys. We've got to play the big game here. And he goes to Xi and he says, now, Comrade Xi, this is kind of awkward, but when he explains that we've been tricked too many times, I'm going to go in and clean out the Donbass at least, because they're shelling our people and all that kind of stuff. And so I know you don't like this kind of thing, but that's what we're pretty much decided to do. And she says, you mean You mean after the Winter Olympics are over, right? here's the here's the cardinal principle of Chinese foreign policy. Westphalia, you don't do this kind of thing. You never do it, okay? And here's Xi Jinping giving us sort of a nihil obstat or an imprimatur. Go ahead. We understand you have to do that. Go ahead and do it, but not until the Olympics. Now, the Olympics were over on the 20th of February. You know what happened on the 21st, 23rd. You know that the invasion happened on the 24th, okay? Now, all this fits together. And the big thing, of course, is that China aligned itself with Russia because Russia's core interests were involved. And Chinese rhetoric, Chinese official pronouncements explained it that way. In other words, no more Westphalia stuff. They would say in their rhetoric and their official pronouncements, when a country's core interests are threatened, they need to make some sort of reaction like that, okay? And so it's been months. They did that for about months, even their rhetoric before. Now they're back to Westphalia, of course, but that was really big. Finally, Putin had a big brother, a very big brother, okay, that he could rely on. And I think that weighed heavily in his eventual decision to go ahead. This is going to be all right, no matter how well armed the Ukrainian army is. And they were well armed by then because of all these tricks. And we can be able to do this because China is backing us. And that's a long way of saying that Putin knew he was up against it, and that's all on the record now. But this story about Biden promising not to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine has not been widely publicized. But there is one academic now who has read this stuff and who says this was the final straw. I mean, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, and look how much closer Ukraine or parts of it is to Russia than Romania or Poland. So, all this stuff makes sense, and all this stuff can come out in the wash once the media is free. And that's a tall thing, because you have people controlling the media, like that fellow who was crying. He's a German diplomat, Christoph, I forget his last name. But as I say, he said, so you're so welcome, J.D. Vance. Vance said, I hope this is the last time I get some applause after he that additional applause. And it was. And it reminded me of Putin in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. Incredible speech where he laid it all down, said no more unipolar world. Now, he started out, when they applauded him, he started out by saying exactly the same thing. I hope this isn't the last applause I get. Well, it was. And if you see those pictures of Bobby Gates and John McCain and Joe Lieberman going like this, they are in the front row. Well, it all comes home to roost. Putin built up the Russian armed forces, built up the country. Now they've got almost an autarkic economy where they don't need anyone else. Of course, they do need people to sell oil to. But how things have changed, if I look like I'm really hopeful, I am, and it's one of those benchmark times where things have changed in a galactic kind of way, tectonic, if you will, but it's really meaningful. Despite all the slips that occur between cup and lip, I think this is a really a good day for peace.
One last thing. I'm reading breaking news. U.S. President Trump has said Ukraine may have to hold new elections. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, Trump insisted that Zelensky was widely unpopular at home. Quote, the leader in Ukraine, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, Trump said. Quote, when they want a seat at the negotiating table, you could say, wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say it's been a long time since we've had an election, Trump stated. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also. Right.
Okay, now, Carl, I'm going to ask you about an idiosyncratic thing where it was reported that Zelensky was trying to crash the meeting in Saudi Arabia. And, you're sort of an old cop and you put things together. So do you have any theories as to why he ended up going to the UAE?
Well, I'll put it to you like this: way back when, some of my channel members may recall that, I don't know, a year or two ago, I did a video, and I said that once the neocons, or the U.S. period, decided to get out of Ukraine, when it was over, we would exercise what I termed the Samsonite option. We would pack our bag. The Samsonite option in Vietnam, when we couldn't leave because we had the domino theory and all these other things, and one day, we're gone. Oh, we can't possibly leave Afghanistan for 20 years because, incubator for terrorism, terrible things. And then one Tuesday, see you later, bye, we're gone. And I recall Ashraf Ghani, he was the puppet president from Afghanistan, and he was known for leaving Afghanistan quite hurriedly, and it was reported that suitcases full of money was falling out of the trucks, and he had $160 million cash as he drove up the tarmac and hurriedly jumped into a plane or helicopter or something, and he took off, and that plane landed in the UAE. And the other day, I'm reading that our guy Zelensky is at the UAE, and there were some discussions made about digital financial, that he was finalizing some deal with like digital financial transactions. And I thought, when the puppets are done, when the organ grinder is finished with the monkey, the monkey always ends up taking his bananas to the UAE. And I just thought, if I'm Zelensky, he's no dummy. He knows the game. He's the puppet. If I'm Zelensky, I say, I'm making a phone call. I'm going to keep playing the game. We're going to stand up against evil Putin. And then I'm getting, between my speeches about the evil Putin, I'm calling Trump, saying, I got a lot of stuff about Biden you might be interested in. The game's over. I know it. You know it. Let's work a deal. I give you all the Biden stuff, the Clinton stuff, the everything stuff you need to know on everybody you need to know it on that I have in Ukraine, that I held on because I knew this day would come, or may. In return, perhaps I could hold on to a slice of this pie that the American taxpayers cooked. I could take a couple slices with myself, and perhaps we could all go our separate ways.
Hey Garland, if I get a show like yours, could I invite you on to be my analyst? That sounds pretty good to me.
I'll say this, Ray. I'll end with this. If I were the Russians, I would say, okay, we've had this second Cold War thing. MH17. There was an investigation done. Navalny, there was alleged Novichok. And we could go on and on. The Skripals. Yulia Skripal she's Russian. I have a right to see her and to talk to her. And there's investigations done. What about, that somebody blew up a pipeline or something? I know Denmark did an investigation. President Trump, we need to put these things behind us. Water under the bridge, shall we say. As part of our final deal, when we cross our T's, and I'm sure you're probably going to have something that you're going to go send to the Senate. They're going to sign off on something, and we'll have a treaty. Perhaps, as part of all of this, I could see the investigations on MS-17. I could sit down and have a talk with Yulia Skripal and ask her how she's been. Perhaps I could look at the Novichok on this, the Dawn Staley or whatever her name is. These Novichok investigations. Mm-hmm. Perhaps we could get the resolution. Would you be so kind? Because I know they won't listen to me, but you're a very powerful man. If you were to call the Brits and say, I'm the president of the United States, and we give you a lot of money and stuff. I want to talk to Yulia Skripal. I want to see these investigations, and I might just share them with somebody else. If you could be so kind as to do that, because we have to resolve these things. I've been accused and convicted in the court of public opinion, and I'd like to get these things done. I would personally, I'd love to. Your thoughts on that, Ray?
Well, that's possible. Not right now, months from now, perhaps. Um, I had a thought, it just escaped me. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Tulsi Gabbard, accused of denying U.S. intelligence conclusions about the use of sarin gas outside Damascus. Okay? Now, we veteran intelligence professionals for sanity warned the president that this was hokey. This was not at all clear that the Syrian government did that. No matter how many times John Kerry get up and said, well, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, okay? We knew, okay, that the British had a sample of that gas, okay? They took it to Portdown, okay? They analyzed it and found out that it was not the same gas known to be in Syrian government stocks. The head of the British military called General Dempsey, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We had a friend, one of our members was really close to General Dempsey's people, and we learned about, we warned the president, look, this is a false allegation, and we were right. So, for Senator Dick Durbin, for Senator Mark Warner, for all these people to be accusing Tulsi Gabbard of not going along with the intelligence conclusions on how Bashar al-Assad did this is so, so crazy that if that comes out, well, it should come out, and it should come out very clearly. And these people should sort of eat some crow, because it was not only verified by us and by the British, but also by the UN inspectors, the Office for Prohibition of Chemical Warfare. They looked at it and they said, not only this, but two other things. So for Tulsi to be accused of that, these people need to be exposed. It's possible that they don't know the real story, but they should be told that right quick. And what better way to do that than to get the British, if Trump's going to call Starmer, let him say, hey, look, get that report that you all had about the sarin gas there in September or August of 2013. Get that report and release it, because it shows that it wasn't Syrian government. It wasn't Bashar al-Assad, as John Kerry claimed. It was somebody else. We think we know who it was, and MI6 also knows who it was. We know who did that, and it was a false flag. That's where we always have to be alert for false flag attacks. But there's one thing that the president could do. Ask Starmer, hey, Starmer, before you come here, if you want to be welcomed by somebody more than the people from American Airlines, bring that evidence with you, because we want to make sure that Tulsi Gabbard is vindicated, and that would be helpful to both of us. So, yeah, there are all kinds of possibilities now, and I just hope my enthusiasm is warranted. I think it is, because I've seen this kind of thing before. How many decades this kind of détente may last, that's another question. I may not be around to see the next turn.
So we better enjoy this one. And I would also say, if I was Tulsi Gabbard, I'd call MI6 and say, I'm new, and I got to meet and greet, and I want to meet people. And I'm probably heading over to London in a week or so. And there's a guy by the name of Joseph Mifsud. Could you have him there for me. While I'm there, I'd like to talk to the Skripals and find out what happened with them and just get their side of the story, so I can go back to the Russians and tell them everything's good and fine. I'd like to talk to the Skripals. We do fund a lot of your intelligence, and we do fund your equivalent of NSA. And certainly, I'm not saying that we could pull some of your funds, but here's a list, and there's 3 names on it: Sergei Skripal, Yulia Skripal, and Joseph Mifsud. I want them waiting for me. I have a few questions for them, although I have a bad feeling that you're going to need a medium to meet the Skripals, unfortunately. I hope that's not the case, but they ain't been heard from for a long, long time. And in your business, Ray, the business that you left, when people haven't been heard from for a long, long time, that could be.
Well, Garland, I'm glad to hear from you regularly. So
let's just hope that doesn't change. Well, thank you very much, Ray. Where can and let's not forget, everybody, RayMcGovern.com. That's where all the Ray's good works are. And where are you on X, I believe, Ray?
It's at Ray McGovern. One word, at Ray McGovern.
All right. Thank you very much, Ray. Look forward to talking to you again. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget, everybody, make sure to share this on all your social media platforms. Follow me on Rockfin. Follow me on Rumble. If you can afford to, please contribute to support the channel. And if you can't, who cares? Use your money for your family. But what's important is that you follow me on all of my platforms in case for some reason they would toss me off of YouTube. And, of course, hit like, subscribe, and share this everywhere. Thanks. We're out.